Empires don't fall in a single moment. They fall for enemies they created within. Berlin, the 27th of February 1920. The water of the Landwehr Canal is the kind of cold that stops being a sensation and becomes a fact. You do not remember deciding to go in. You remember the bridge, and then you remember the water deciding for you, closing over your head with the indifference of a current that has taken people before you and will take people after you, and has never once cared which. A police sergeant pulls you out. You do not thank him. You do not tell him your name because you do not have one to give. Or you have one, and some other part of you, deeper than the part that is shivering on the riverbank, has already decided it will not be handed back. They take you to the Elizabeth Hospital first, then to Dulldorf. A locked ward smells like something you will never forget. Carbolic soap fighting a losing battle against something underneath it. The other women here have names, real ones, or names the staff have given up trying to correct. You have a chart that says Fräulein Unbekannt, Miss Unknown. It is the only thing about you that is, for now, completely accurate. You learn the rhythm of the ward without a single word, only by observing. The shuffle at 6, the tin cup at breakfast, the particular quality of light through a window that has been painted at some point by someone who did not want the patients to see too much of the sky. You do not cry where anyone can watch you doing it. This is simply one more decision you find already made, with no memory of making it. 2 years pass like this. Some nights you almost remember something. A smell, a sound, a hand on your shoulder that is not the orderly's hand. And then it dissolves. The kind of forgetting that comes when you are too tired to chase a name. It is another patient who says it first. Not a doctor. Not anyone with the authority to make it true. A woman named Clara, 3 beds down, who has read every illustrated paper smuggled into this ward twice over, who stops one evening at the foot of your bed and looks at you the way you might look at an old photograph of someone you recognise but cannot quite name. I know that face, she says. I have seen it before, in a magazine, before the war. You say nothing. You have said nothing for 2 years, but for the first time since the water closed over your head, something in you goes very still. The stillness of a person who has just heard, spoken aloud by someone else, a thing they have not yet allowed themselves to think. She does not say the name, not yet, but you already know with a certainty that arrives whole and unexplained exactly which face she means. Some of what comes back is yours. Some of it is only what you were told so many times by people who loved you, that it became yours instead. And lying in that bed at Dulldorf, you have stopped being able to tell which is which. You know, the way you know your own pulse, that your grandfather was a hunted man. He freed 40 million serfs from people who had owned them like furniture, and the empire he set free turned around and tried to kill him for it. 6 times, by some counts, before a bomb on a Petersburg embankment finally finished the job in 1881. Your father was 12, standing in a palace room when they carried his own father in with his legs gone beneath him and laid him down to bleed out in front of the whole family. He would never again mistake reform for safety. He answered the next 40 years with a closed fist instead. This is the country your parents inherited. 300 years of absolute rule sitting on top of a peasantry that has almost nothing in a system built to make sure it stays that way. Your mother was not born to it, a German princess, raised half in England, who fell in love with your father as a girl and was told for years she could not have him, until illness forced your grandfather's hand and there was no time left to keep saying no. They were married within weeks of his death, a wedding stitched directly onto the hem of a funeral. People said it was a bad omen. People were not wrong. The coronation gave them a second one. Petersburg, Moscow that week, fills with more people than it has ever held, drawn by the promise of free bread and beer and a coin with the new Tsar's face on it, all of it waiting in a field called Kodinka. The crowd is too large for the ground that holds it. Somewhere near dawn it stops being a crowd and starts being a single weight, pressing inward on itself. And by the time it is over, the field has more dead in it than some battles manage in a day. Your father goes to a ball at the French embassy that same evening because protocol says he must, and the Empire never quite forgives him the appearance of it. They call him Bloody Nicholas before he has ruled for a single full year. Then you are born, the fourth daughter, when an heir was the only birth that mattered, and you remember your mother's disappointment landing on you like weather, something she didn't choose and couldn't help, and you forgave her instantly, the way children forgive almost everything. 3 years later, your brother arrives. Not just a brother, but the answer to a question the dynasty has been asking for 10 years. The one birth that means the name Romanov has somewhere left to go. For a single day, your family is allowed to be simply happy about it, the uncomplicated way other families are allowed to be happy, without anyone writing it down as a historic event. The happiness lasts about as long as it takes the doctors to notice he bruises wrong. Haemophilia, a word your mother will not say out loud for years, because she carries it in her blood from her grandmother in England, and some part of her has decided his illness is a sentence she handed down herself. A child who can die from a bruise reorganises a household entirely around the absence of accidents. You learn to be careful before you learn what the carefulness is protecting. This is where the man arrives, the one you are never permitted to call by the name everyone else in Russia already fears. In your house, at your table, kneeling at your brother's bedside through nights when the doctors have run out of anything useful to do, he is only ever our friend. He does not look like a man who should have this kind of hold over anyone. Unwashed, a peasant's beard, robes that never seem quite clean, and yet there is something in his eyes that people reach for strange words to describe, unholy or divine, depending on how badly they need to believe in him. Grown women who know better find they cannot hold his gaze, and then find they cannot look away from it either. He claims he can see what is wrong in a person before they have said a word aloud. Enough people decide this is true that it stops mattering whether it actually is. He sits with Alexei through the worst of it, and somehow more than once the worst of it ends. Your mother decides this is not coincidence. Your father, exhausted and out of better options, lets her decide it. Outside the nursery, in the part of the empire that does not get to watch a dying child improve, he becomes something else. A peasant with the run of the palace, a name attached to every rumour Petersburg can manufacture. A man some of your father's own ministers now answer to, before they answer to the Tsar. By the war, he has more influence over the government than half the men with titles for it, and the Empire has decided, almost unanimously, that he is the reason everything is going wrong. In December of 1916, a group of noblemen lure him to a basement on the Moika, feed him cake laced with enough poison to kill 5 men, and watch him eat it without flinching. They shoot him when the poison does nothing. He gets up anyway. It takes a second shot, a struggle in the courtyard, a third bullet to bring him down, and they still aren't certain enough. They wrap him in a curtain and put him through the ice of the Neva before they'll believe it's finished. It takes most of one night to kill a single man, which becomes, in the retelling, the kind of detail people repeat because it makes for a better story than the truth probably was. You feel your mother's grief before anyone tells you anything. She does not need to be told twice that the one person who could keep your brother alive is no longer in the house. You do not yet understand that the Empire's grief has already started keeping its own private list and that your family's name is near the top of it. The war should have united them with you. For a while it nearly does. Your mother trains as a nurse. Your father leaves for the front to take command himself, and for a season Russia almost believes in its Tsar again. The season does not last. Soldiers die faster than the railways can carry the news home. Bread queues stretch longer than the patience of the people standing in them, and Petrograd, the new name for the old capital, more Russian, less German, as if a name could fix anything, starts to fill with crowds that no longer disperse when they're told to. By March of 1917, Petrograd's own garrison has stopped following orders, and the one general he sends to retake the city by force never reaches it. His train rerouted by men who control the railways now, his soldiers more interested in joining the crowds than firing on them. With force no longer something he can rely on, his own generals tell him, one after another, that the war cannot be won with him on the throne, and that abdication is the only way left to avoid a civil war on top of the one already being lost at the front. He writes 4 words in his diary that night: treason, cowardice, and deceit, and signs the abdication the next morning in a railway carriage, with the calm gesture of someone who has already decided that none of this is really happening to him. You are not in the room for any of it. You are at the Alexander Palace with your mother and your sisters and a brother too sick to be moved, watching soldiers who used to salute you walk past the windows without looking up. When your father comes home, he is not the Tsar anymore. He is only your father, under guard, in his own house, and somehow that is the version of him you find hardest to look at. They let you stay together at least. That becomes the shape of your gratitude now, not for what you have, but for what hasn't yet been taken. You keep lessons going because your mother insists a princess should still know French verbs, even with no kingdom left for her to use them in. You keep a small garden. You keep for a while your own rooms, your own books, the particular silence of Tsarskoye Selo's gardens in summer, until August comes and they put you on a train heading east, and you understand without anyone needing to say it that this is not a vacation. Tobolsk is smaller, colder, further from anything that matters. The governor's house has fewer rooms than you are used to, and far more soldiers watching you live in them. Still, for a while, there is a kind of mercy in being forgotten. Out here, in Siberia, the world seems to have other things on its mind. You celebrate a birthday. You read aloud in the evenings. You watch your brother's joints swell and recede with the same exhausted vigilance you've practiced your whole life, and for almost a year, nothing gets dramatically worse. Your father surprises you here. A man who spent his whole life being told what an empire needed from him seems, stripped of the empire, almost more himself than you have ever seen him, sawing wood in the yard with Alexei at his side for hours at a time, clearing snow, digging at a little duck pond he's absurdly proud of, the kind of contentment you didn't know he had in him when he still had a country to run. One of the guards jokes, half admiring, that if they'd given this man a farm instead of an empire, he'd have worked his way to owning all of Russia back twice over. Your mother still calls him emperor in her letters out of habit. You start to suspect, watching him laugh with your brother over a woodpile, that some private part of him has been relieved of a weight he never wanted to carry in the first place, that the only crown he ever really needed was the 5 of you, in one house together. Then, in the spring, they move you again. South, this time, to a city called Yekaterinburg, to a merchant's house with a fence built around it taller than a man, and windows that the guards paint over from the outside so that no one in the street can see in, and no one inside can quite see out. They call it the House of Special Purpose, though no one ever tells you what the purpose is. You stop being able to tell whether it is morning or evening from the light alone. You start counting days instead by the sound of the guards changing shift and by how close the fighting sounds on certain nights. Not Germans, that war ended for Russia months ago, but white soldiers and Czech legionnaires advancing along the rail line from the east, somewhere out there, drawing nearer in a way that should feel like rescue, and somehow, instead, feels like a clock running out faster than before. Yekaterinburg. The early hours of 17th of July 1918. They wake you a little after midnight, which by itself is not unusual. The guards have woken you at strange hours before, for head counts, for nothing. Commandant Yurovsky says there is shooting in the streets, that for your own safety the family needs to move to a different room, lower in the house until it passes. This is by now simply how you live. Explanations that don't quite fit, from people you no longer trust, however carefully you still do what they ask. You dress quickly. Your mother takes a pillow. You and your sisters tuck small things into the linings of your clothes without really discussing it. Not jewels exactly, not anymore. Just whatever has survived this long sewn into a hem, kept close out of a habit none of you have examined too carefully. 11 of you go down. Your parents, the 4 of you. Your brother carried in your father's arms because his legs have given out again this week. And 4 people who could have left months ago and didn't. The doctor, the maid, the cook, the footman, choosing to stay for reasons none of them ever explained and none of you thanked them enough for. The room downstairs is small, half underground, the kind of room a house keeps for storage rather than people. Yurovsky asks for chairs. Your mother cannot stand for long, your brother cannot stand at all. And 2 are brought, your mother and Alexei seated at the centre of the room like a king and queen arranged for a photograph nobody is taking. The rest of you stand around them. Your dog is here too, small and confused, pressed against your sister's ankles. Yurovsky comes back into the room with more men than have ever stood in one room with you before, lined along the far wall, in a way that registers in your body a full second before it registers anywhere else. He reads from a paper. The words move past almost too fast to keep. The Ural Soviet decided must be shot, and your father, who has spent 50 years being the only person in any room who is told things plainly, turns to him and says simply,
"What?"
twice, as if the sentence might rearrange itself into something survivable if he just asked for it again. It does not rearrange itself. The room is so small the first shots are almost as loud as the war itself. After that there is no more room for watching anything in order. Smoke, noise, a confusion of bodies that refuses to be still, screaming in a corner where the bullets, for reasons no one understands yet, do not seem to be landing the way they should. It takes the men a long time to understand why. The diamonds sewn into your corsets are deflecting the bullets meant for your hearts, and what should have taken 30 seconds takes closer to 20 minutes instead. Reloading, bayonets, the first volley's failures finished off one by one at close range. Your dog dies somewhere in the middle of it, mercifully fast, the only one of you. The room is in any hurry to be done with. And then, nothing. The particular nothing of a room that has just stopped being able to hold any more screaming, on a floor that was never built to hold this much blood, while outside, through windows the guards painted over months ago, an ordinary Russian summer night keeps going as if nothing in it has changed at all. You do not remember the moment after that, or you remember it too well, And some part of you lying in a hospital bed in Berlin 2 years from now has already decided that remembering it at all is its own kind of survival, whether or not your body was actually in that room when it happened. Clara says the name within the week, not directly to you, but to anyone in the ward who will listen. And in 1922 there turn out to be more people willing to listen than you'd expect. You stop being the woman without a name. You become, instead, a name everyone has an opinion about, which is its own kind of disappearance, just dressed in better clothes. Within a year there's a title in the newspapers, and a letter from a man named Gleb Botkin, whose devotion to you comes from somewhere specific. His father was the doctor who died in that cellar, a man who could have left the family's service at any point, and chose instead to stay until the end. Of everyone who comes to believe you, he is the one whose belief costs him the least explaining. Grand Duchess Olga, your father's own sister, comes to see you in 1925, sits with you for days, and leaves uncertain in a way the papers later flatten into a simple no. Others are less careful. Relatives who stand to lose money if you're real deny you the loudest. Relatives who stand to lose nothing examine you the longest, and leave less certain than they arrived. You spend the next 32 years in a courtroom that never quite decides anything, because both sides' lawyers understand a private fact long before any judge admits it aloud. There is no longer a single living person who can describe that room better than you can. You tell them about your uncle in Hesse in a way only someone who'd sat at his table could. You tell them about your father's nickname for you, your hopeless French verbs, 100 small things nobody thought to make public in 1918 because nobody yet knew there would ever be a use for them. And then there is your foot. The same crooked bend at the big toe on the same side that a doctor in Russia once noted on the real Anastasia and never published anywhere a forger could have found it. A nursemaid who dressed that foot 1,000 times when it belonged to a child looks at yours, decades later, in a hospital room in Germany, and says nothing for a long moment before she says, "That is her foot." You are an old woman by the time the case is finally allowed to simply end, undecided, in 1970. You have spent 50 years being asked to prove a single sentence, and 50 years answering, with everything, except the one piece of paper a court would accept. You were there. Grigory Rasputin, the man they called our friend, held more sway over the Russian state by the end than half the ministers who despised him for it, and it took most of one chaotic night in December to finally kill him. The empire he haunted had spent 3 centuries building the very conditions of its own collapse. A population mostly poor, an autocracy that had long since mistaken obedience for loyalty. A single sickly boy whose blood could turn a bruise into a death sentence. When Lenin gave the order 18 months later, he did not give it for the Tsar alone. Leaving any of the family alive, he reasoned, would leave the monarchy something to rally behind. He called the decision simplicity itself. The family died in that cellar in the early hours of 17th of July 1918, all 7 of them, alongside the 4 servants who had chosen to stay rather than leave. The Soviet Union denied even that much for 70 years, and for decades several of the bodies stayed lost in a forest outside Yekaterinburg, buried under brushwood and acid. Exactly the kind of silence a story like hers would need in order to survive. The first 9 remains weren't identified until 1991. The last 2 weren't found until 2007. By then there was no missing Romanov left anywhere for anyone to have rescued. The woman who had spent 64 years insisting otherwise died in 1984 in Virginia, an American citizen by then, never living to see any of it confirmed. 10 years after her death, a fragment of tissue surgeons had quietly preserved from a 1979 operation was tested against the Romanov remains and against a living relative of a Polish family named Shanskowski. It matched the polls. Years later, in a separate lab, a few strands of her own hair, found tucked inside a book that had belonged to her husband, told the same story all over again. The woman the world had called Anna Anderson was Franziska Shanskowska, a factory worker from a small Polish village who vanished from a different Berlin asylum in the weeks before Anderson surfaced, half drowned, from a canal. Almost everything else she told you was true. The empire, the war, the abdication, the man they called our friend, the cellar, the chairs, the 20 minutes it took. She had spent years steeped in émigré circles soaked in exactly that record, absorbing someone else's entire life the way only a person determined to disappear into it completely could. The only part of the story that was never true was the first-person pronoun in front of it. Even now, a handful of people who studied her for decades still won't let the verdict stand, pointing to the way some of those samples were stored and handled long before they ever reached a lab. The science was never really the question. Some stories, once believed for 60 years, simply stopped needing to be true in order to keep being told. History is full of moments like this. If this one moved you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. A thumbs up helps more than you might think. And leave a comment. Tell us which moment in history you'd like to step into next, or simply that you were here. Every voice matters. This is You Are There. We'll see you in history.